I have a problem, a big one, and it looks a bit like this. So I have so many scraps. I have big ones, I have lots and lots of small ones, I have scraps in neutral colours, I have a box of scraps that are in strips, and I have lots of little ones like these. They have a life of their own. In my craft room, scraps simply proliferate. I love using them, but they also get me down, because managing them just takes up so much time and energy, time that I would prefer to use creatively, but if I don't, my desk is a mess. So I decided to do something about it, and after a lot of trial and error, and indeed getting it wrong, I found something that really works. So I have a 4-point system for managing my scraps now, which means that I use them more productively, I have more time to play, I feel more energetic and more creative, and I simply know where things are. So today I'm sharing this system, along with a few creative ideas for how to chomp through your scraps and really use them up. And one bit of a game changer idea that I'd like to share today is this messy, scrappy snippet. And I know that snippets have been made before, and I've seen some beautiful ones here on YouTube. The way that I've designed this one really chomps through all sorts of pieces of scrap paper. So not only will I show you how to make it, I'll also give you ideas for how to use it. So the first step in this 4-step system involves setting yourself up with a certain number of containers that are used with a particular purpose, and I'm starting with the one that I use the most and I think is the absolute mainstay, the backbone of my system. So I use this, I'll turn it on its side, I use this white basket as much because it's lightweight and it's a decent size, and I fill this with medium size scrappy bits of paper that are in the main of a neutral colour. Now they might have bits of colour on, but the idea is that the patterns and the tones, that we even have Amazon wrapping paper here, and I've even got a little bit of material there. The colours and tones in all of this are meant to be the neutrals, which makes it incredibly useful to reach into and to mix with other pieces of paper. So why don't I show a little bit about what's in it to give you a flavour, and also the sizes, and also the real junkiness of what I use. So, book pages, scrap paper with nothing on it, a book page where I've had a go at dyeing it. That was with Arteza metallic paints and water, and I just dunked it. Experimentation. A little bit of an offcut from a digital. A different book page, so that's dictionary. A final bit of relatively neutral colours, a little bit of teal here. There's a bird, so that's scrapbook paper. An offcut from a digital. Another digital, and I know I've got colour in it, but the backing to this is in those neutral tones. Scrapbook paper. More digital. Of course, music paper, and oh, what a lovely buttery paper this is. And you can see that the sizes are not those teeny tiny ones. This is, I keep this stocked actually, this is Amazon packing paper where I've rubbed with an acrylic block with gold acrylic paint and just let that dry, and it gives me fantastic paper for collaging with. More different types of book pages that have been ripped up. So these will be not whole book pages, but the parts that are left over when you've had a go at using some. I've got a little bit of colour invading here, and that does tend to happen. So one of the tips I have is try to be a little bit controlled about what you put in the particular pouch. You can see it builds up really easily. I've got other glossy book pages in here. I've got more Amazon packing paper that's of that grayer colour. So anything that I feel in the moment is going to qualify on the grounds of a neutral. So a rather sizable piece of vintage book page, vintage music paper here, but not a whole sheet, and that's about the maximum that I would let in here. So these are meant to be all the cut downs. I'm not starting with whole pieces of paper because I don't call those scraps, but when I have something, I put it in here. I have a quick look at the size. I mean, pieces like that, absolutely perfect. They go in. So this is box number 1, the backbone, the staple. It builds up quickly, and so I do have later on in this video ideas for how to specifically use pieces from here along with a few others. So the second box in this system is the baby brother of the first one, and as you can see, this is full again of, let's say, 90% neutrals, but also the odd little colourful bit, because it steps in, it just leaps in, it sneaks in. So these are pieces of all sorts of shapes and sizes. I definitely keep the offcuts as I just rip and tear the edge off maybe a piece of paper to reduce it in size. I have got some thinner strips, particularly from book pages, but these are, as you can see, just smaller pieces. So tiny bit of digital, tiny bit of packing paper, and yes indeed I will use something like that. Another old encyclopedia page, piece of graph paper, piece of wrapping paper, tiny bit of ledger paper. So I put all of these in here because they are, that's actually, looks like music paper, but it's actually wrapping paper. Because they are smaller pieces, I don't need as big a box, but this is about the maximum that I would want to allow to proliferate in this box. And what I do, as I'll talk about soon, is tell you the projects I initiate to really take these down. So box number 2 is a smorgasbord of lovely little pieces of neutrals in all sorts of shapes and sizes, but keeping it relatively small. Not every project we create is going to generate neutrals, so this is box number 3 in the system, and as you can see there's a lot more colour in here. So these are small pieces. They do look rather regular in shape and size. They're not really meant to be. They include just torn offcuts, but they typically, for coloured card and paper in my projects, I guess they tend to be things that I've trimmed. So these are the sorts of pieces of paper and colour that you might find more difficult to use, or maybe use a bit less in today's junk journaling. But I keep all of these. I have got some neutrals that have snuck in. Life isn't perfect, it's going to happen. I let the shiny pieces of paper come in here too. It could even be just the offcut from, you can see where I've punched something out there with a serrated edge. I've got bits of cardstock, that's an old calendar. I've got offcuts from nice scrapbook paper. I'm not going to throw that away. Some lovely little pieces of white that I can rip up. Just things I've stamped on and decided it's not a good enough image to cut out. All sorts. Oh, I've even got a bit of cardboard in here. So if it's small, it might be paper or cardstock. But if it's coloured, it tends to go not in my neutrals box, but in here. And to be frank, this is probably a box that's a bit too big. I am going to talk soon about how to use all of these items, all of these bits of paper in your projects, to use them up productively. And to do that, we do want to think about having boxes that are small enough to put near to us and around us. So the bigger the box, the more space it takes up, maybe the less space on your desk is left for other things. Box number 4 is for those long, thin strips. So things that you typically slice off the side of a piece of paper, or you might cut down using a punch, maybe something with a serrated edge, something fancy. It can be things that are not necessarily in a straight line. This is old scrapbook paper. But I tend to generate quite a lot of these, and whether they're shiny or coloured, plain white or just scrapbook paper, they go in here. So these are the super long ones, and yep, I do seem to have quite a lot, but at least they are organised and they're not spreading and walking around my craft room, and they can be really thin ones too. So I'm not going to throw away something as pretty as a really tiny thin strip. I will use them. So here we have a ton of those,
ripped edges, cut edges, all sorts. If one of those appears, they go in there. And the last container in this 4-step system that I want to talk about is this one. So this houses my teal paper pieces. Now you could have obviously more than one of these little containers. What I do is try to limit myself to focusing on one particular flash of colour in my projects at a time. And I've picked teal. I think it's an absolutely gorgeous colour. It goes with many, many others. It goes with yellow ochres, it goes with neutral colours. And what I've done is pull out from those little places where you tend to let things sit and you hoard them and you don't really know what to do with them. So these are fabric pieces. I've put some of those in my tub. Aren't they lovely? And I've also put offcuts from any of my teal projects as I create them. So there might be bits of Christmas paper. There's another bit. There might be just plain old thin paper. I've got some nice spotty paper here. I've got very nice K&Co teal colours there. That's absolutely fantastic for in projects. Plain royal blue, a bit of Louise Heinzel, more plain paper, some with numbers on. They can be tiny scraps, they can be circles. I think that's from my window wallet. They can be painted on by any little scraps of paper that I've added some of my old paint to, using it up, and it could be just very pretty elegant paper. But anything that's of that blue or teal variety, or my chosen colour of the month goes in one pot, and I reach for this to just add that colour palette of flair so that I feel I am mixing colour into my projects from time to time. In fact, I will be showing you a few of the projects where I use the snippet that I make later to add some colour to what would otherwise be a fairly neutral project. So I've got a few of those just to share later on.
So having set up your system of boxes, what you want to do in step 2 is add to them as you create, and that means it's worth being just a little bit disciplined. It also means you probably want to think about the size of the boxes that you're using, because having them to hand might mean having them on your desk. I like to have my boxes just either nearby on the floor beside me, or I put 1 or 2 of them on my desk around me. I'm lucky enough to have a desk that's quite large, and next to my twinkly lights I have 1 or 2 of the boxes for the smaller scraps. Being disciplined about adding to the boxes isn't easy. It's so tempting to get caught up in that creative process when you're making a pocket out of a piece of junk mail or an envelope folder, or a trifold that's guzzling some of those beautiful little pieces of paper. When you're tearing pieces off, just try to remember to reach out and put it in the relevant box. Think about the benefits of not having to spend all that time sorting out the scraps once you're done. Think about the joy of having a desk that just looks beautiful at the end of your project and you don't have to spend 5 minutes or so sorting things out. And think about all of the extra creative energy and the ideas you'll have because you've got a system that sorts things and it's not dragging you down and having to spend your time sorting them out.
Step 3 in this system involves making a conscious decision about the types of projects that you might create and therefore how you keep the levels in those boxes quite low. And I've got a few suggestions for the sorts of things that you might want to create that have a specific impact on the levels of your scraps. So last week I made in my video a trifold, and it opens like this. It has a pocket here, it has a pocket here, and it has lining and collage on the inside. So let me share, let's pick one. So this one, so maybe this one, has a use for some of those medium-sized pieces that we had in the white basket. So I've just lined and collaged on the back here with a piece, and although it wasn't big enough to do justice to the whole of this back, I then took some smaller pieces from that box that had the smaller pieces in, and I've added some extra elements. So this is great for using small and medium size pieces, and then some larger pieces I took to make a really fantastic impact on the front of the trifold. I've added a piece in the centre here, so that was a medium sized piece as well, and I loved making these because I just felt that they were such a good way of using up all of my scraps across the piece, across all of those boxes and tubs. On the flap I was able to use some really teeny tiny pieces. Let me show you on another example here. So on the flap here to the trifold I have book page, just a tiny ripped piece, and a little bit of map paper. I've used a bigger piece of Artie May's butterfly digi on the front, and on the back you can see again I brought together two scraps, so a botanical and some music paper. And so all of these are great ways of using up scraps from those tubs according to which of yours are getting really full. This flap in particular has got an incredible amount of mixed little pieces on it, so again using up those tiny pieces. An altered envelope is another great project for using up your scraps. Firstly, you can make an envelope really easily using book pages, and I have a video on my channel if you want some super simple guidance for using basic supplies to make an envelope. But they're incredibly good for giving you the chance to use up those little scraps to decorate the front. You could add whatever colour palette you like, pick one that suits your mood of the day, and maybe make a flower and add that too. And last week I made a pouch with an extending centre with 3 pockets inside, and I added robustness and colour and, let's say, a bit of glamour by collaging using all those sorts of pieces on the outside. It's a very relaxing project, that. So again, check out my channel if you feel like making a 3-pocket pouch using collage. With all of these projects now, what I do try to do is use basic supplies and make things really easy. So I do have on my Pinterest page for today's video this 4-step system written down in just key bullet points. So if you find my Pinterest page, you'll find this and many others the collection is building, and I hope this helps you organise your scraps and get really great fun out of your scrap pieces with these creative ideas. And step 4 in this 4-step process involves periodically, maybe once every 4 weeks, 6 weeks, allocating time to a specific scrapbusting project that will allow any of your overflow tubs to come down to a more reasonable level. And the one that I have invoked recently is my very messy scrappy snippet, which looks a bit like this. So it is using pieces from my neutrals tubs in particular, or this example is. I've also made an equivalent one using those tiny coloured pieces, which are perhaps more difficult to use. And they really do use up all different types of size and shape. So I'll show you in a second how I do it on my sewing machine. I'll just very quickly do a little example. But you can see it has got its own unique character and form and shape. I've run down it with a zigzag stitch. In this example I've used a very neutral thread in a small zigzag, and I literally pick out specific types of paper and I pepper in amongst the little scraps as I sew some little digital papers, some labels. You could use whatever you like. I've even got the tiniest elements of scrapbook paper in here. I don't mind if I've got bits of thread, and it's got pointy pieces. I don't do anything to the scraps. I just lift them out of the tub and start using them. But it's the way in which I kind of put them under the sewing machine needle and keep the thing going that I think really allows us to chomp through this and use up lots of paper. So I've got some examples of how I've used it as well, because I do have questions about what on earth to do with a little lovely snippet like this. Well, let me set up my sewing machine and I'll show you how I very quickly and easily make my scrappy, messy snippet. So to make snippets like these, so this is an example of the neutrals, or indeed one using those coloured scraps, let's not forget about those. I've set myself up with a box of papers on the right, so I've lifted the small box with the smallish neutral papers in, I've set up my sewing machine. So I have a Hobbycraft MIDI sewing machine. I haven't shown you this for some time, but I absolutely love it. I'm using a pale thread today, and I've also got, as an extra ingredient in this tasty cake, just a few labels. So this is what's going to add a tiny bit of interest, but you could use whatever you like. So I'll set up the papers under here, and I'll show you what combination and what depth of paper, how I mix them to create something that really does use our scraps. And the first thing I'm going to do is just pull out some of the pieces that are a little bit long and thin. They're quite untidy. I've got some bigger ones in here. Let's just get a few out of that box so that I can use them. And one of the technique tips I have is to not try to put more than 4 layers under the needle at any time, or certainly not for the sewing machine that I have. That's what I do. I start with one piece and I get any other. I've got a blue one in here. I'm just going to put it on top, put it underneath, put that down, and actually what I will do is turn the dial so I get the zigzag, and have my foot underneath here, and I'm off. I'm just going to add little pieces as I go. Maybe I can add another here. I'll just tuck it under, push it under, ideally at an angle that's different from the piece behind, and then start sewing. And as soon as I've done a little bit, I will think about adding the next piece. If I need to, I'll lift the foot. I'll just tuck a piece under. Doesn't need to be super lined up. I'll show you what happens if we go squiffy. And I'll just add another piece. You can see how it's already rocking and rolling. We're moving. Let's think about our labels. Now if it's a big dominant label, a strong and bold one, I might put it underneath so that it breaks up the lines. And then I'll pick up another piece and just lift up whatever's on top, put that under, keep moving, and even tiny pieces like that can go in. Book page works superbly well. I like to stick to either just neutrals or the coloured, but to be honest, whatever takes your fancy. And if you have a piece that's meant to be straight and it decides it doesn't want to be, let's give you an example. Just do a bit of sewing and rip it off. And this approach means you can be quite rapid at your sewing and chomping through those scraps. As soon as I reach a point where I think that long back piece is disappearing, I'll find another longer piece, pick up one of these and get that going. And then I'll just add a bit more strength, adding more pieces going across. Maybe I can have another label. Let's have one in a jolly colour of red. I'm just being wary about having too many layers because I've got a very low cost sewing machine here. I'm just being careful. And if I've got a piece like this, well, I might just take that down, rip it down like that, and tuck that underneath again. And if you need to, lift the foot, just bring the foot up with the needle out to help you put a piece of paper underneath. Keep going down. Just keep tucking those pieces underneath. And in no time at all, you'll end up with something that's super long. See, it works really well with these gorgeous pieces of packing paper. That's a fantastic use of them. And I said I'd show you how I use these, so let me just point at a few projects where I've had fun gluing it on. So a few examples for using your snippet, whether that's a neutral one or a coloured one. and I do use both. I was making some very small little envelopes from book pages and decorating them. So I took a few of those and I added some small pieces cut off the snippet just on the sides. I've got one on the left hand side here, and I added a butterfly and some splats of gold. Here's one where I very obviously used the coloured piece, and it's right at the end of the snippet, so the sewing doesn't even go all the way to the edge. So I've looked at the butterfly and toned the butterfly with the little bit of snippet. And on this one I've just got a piece of the neutral which goes so well with the collection of collage here. And here's another bit, beautiful green in the snippet that tones with the green in the collage on the envelope. So other projects where I added were a tiny element down here on one of my no sew no glue envelopes that comes in a diamond shape, and I thought the pinks and greens down here went well with the paper that I used for that. This one has a piece going all the way across, so what was rather plain glossy book page becomes vibrant and really fun by adding a piece of snippet on the diagonal. On my expanding pocket pouch, which I made the other week, so this has 3 pockets, and I've added a piece of snippet in that direction rather than traditionally going across. Again, I've used the colourful piece, and I added some extra bits of sequin just to use some of those up, and I feel that this just makes me think of a clutch bag. I don't know what you think. Does the size and shape of this and the design remind you of a clutch bag? Let me know. On this one I took a piece across here and it adds texture. I didn't take it all the way across, but again adding an extra element to a pouch. And the last example is making a belly band here, which would work really well as an element inside a trifold. So perhaps you could have a pocket behind like I did on my trifold, and then you could have this with a belly band here, and I've just sewn that in, and I think that works really well for giving texture. So these are my scrap paper piece organisation and creative use ideas. My 4-point system will be in Pinterest, so follow me on Pinterest and on Instagram to see more behind the scenes views of my desk and what I get up to. And check out the trifold that I made the other week if you feel like using up your scraps. I hope to see you soon.